Here is our first chapter, chapter 1. It's called Trouble with the British. You can follow along as I read. In 1812, James Madison had a hard choice to make. Many Americans were angry with the British. Some of them were saying the United States should declare war on Great Britain, but others disagreed. They said the United States should not go to war. Madison was president of the United States. He had to decide what to do. Should he ask the U.S. Congress to declare war, or should he try to keep peace? James Madison was the fourth president of the United States. At the time, Great Britain was already at war with France. The two countries had been fighting for years. Most of the countries in Europe were involved in the war. Some sided with the British, others sided with the French. The French were led by a man named Napoleon. He was a brave leader. He had beaten the British in a number of battles. Still, the British kept fighting. So that's a picture of Napoleon. He led the French. The United States tried to stay out of this big war. At first, most Americans did not care to get involved. American traders wished to trade with both Great Britain and France, but this led to problems. When U.S. ships traded with the British, the French got upset. They didn't want Americans trading with their enemies. When the U.S. ships traded with the French, the British got upset for the same reason. Sometimes British ships would stop American ships to keep them from trading with the French. Sometimes French ships would stop American ships to keep them from trading with the British. The Americans had problems with both the French and the British. As time went on, the problems with the British increased. The British and the French were at war. King George III and Napoleon. King George was ruler of Great Britain, and Napoleon was in charge of the French military. The British had a strong army and an even stronger navy, but serving in the British Navy was a hard job. Some people quit. Others ran away. This was a problem for the British. They needed all the men they could get. How else could they defeat the French? The British spent a lot of time looking for men who had run off. From time to time, they would stop American ships. British officers would come on deck to look for British men. They would grab men and force them to serve in the British Navy. This was called impressment. The British said they only took British men who had run away, but they were not always careful. Sometimes they grabbed Americans. Stories about men taken by the British were printed in the papers. How do you think Americans felt when they read them? They felt angry. Some of them felt the United States needed to fight back. They said the United States needed to declare war on Great Britain. British commanders, these are the people on the right here, look as men from American ships are impressed or forced to serve in the British Navy. Impressment was one problem, but there were others. Many in the United States were also upset with the British for trading with Native Americans. In 1812, most Americans were farmers. At first, most farmers had homes near the East Coast, but then the country began to grow. People went west. They settled in places far from the coast. They set up farms, they planted crops. There was just one problem. There were already people living there. The settlers were moving onto land where Native Americans hunted and made their homes. Native Americans did not like this. There were many fights between the settlers and Native Americans. This is a picture of people continuing westward expansion. The British controlled Canada. They sent traders south from Canada to trade with Native Americans. These traders sold all sorts of things to Native Americans. The British said they had a right to trade with Native Americans. But lots of people in the United States didn't see it that way. They said the British were helping Native Americans attack American settlers. They felt they needed to fight back. You can see there were many reasons for Americans to be angry with the British, but there were also good reasons for not declaring war. A war causes death, wrecks towns, and costs a lot of money. Plus, Americans felt that the British would not be easy to defeat. President Madison and the men in Congress would have to think long and hard about declaring war. This is a picture of President Madison and the men in Congress and how they really had to think long and hard before declaring war. All right, that's the end of chapter 1. Next time we'll look at chapter 2, the War Hawks.